You're listening to Forge Theater Labs,
a podcast devoted to exploring theater history.
Where does that idea come from?
concepts in storytelling.
Is anything that original?
Isn't that just an assumption?
And the creation of theater from behind the scenes.
How do they even do that?
This is Forge Theater Labs.
History, innovation, perspective.
Hello, everybody. I'm Josh Hsu, and welcome to Forge Theater Labs. Today, I'm thrilled to invite Allison McCall to talk about her experience as an artistic director at Mad Horse Theater Company. Allison McCall is the artistic director of Mad Horse Theater Company in South Portland, Maine, a company that has been creating bold, ensemble-driven work for nearly 4 decades. A longtime company member, Allison stepped into leadership after years as an actor, director, and collaborator within the organization. Mad Horse is known for its commitment to challenging contemporary plays, its deeply collaborative ensemble structure, and its pay-what-you-can model, which has expanded access for audiences while maintaining artistic rigor. Welcome, Allison. So glad to have you on.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Mad Horse has been around the block for quite a while now. And I thought, I might ask you, what is the most sort of typical Mad Horse moment you've experienced where you thought, all right, this is how we do things here?
Oh, that's such a great question. I feel like I have a little bit of like a conglomeration of my answer, and it's all rooted in the fact that we are an ensemble-based theater. So as any theater makers know, throughout the process, whether it's rehearsal or on stage, it's live theater, so something weird and wacky can happen. And there's been just a few of those shows that I think we've all been part of where one of it's like it feels like something a little bit too big goes awry. And where it's like those normal moments, right, where you're like, what am I going to do? How do we fix this? And I think something that makes Mad Horse so special, and it for me really underlines that question of or that statement, right, of this is how we do things, is we then have that ensemble to turn to help. And some like recent examples have been we right after the pandemic, we had a designer have to step away last minute who was working on Scenic, and it was like days before we opened the show, which is like really, really scary and really hard because Scenic is obviously so important. And we just turned to the company to say like, hey, we need help. And just the horsies showed up and we're like, what do you want? What do you need? What was left over? Let's think about this creatively. Let me lend my hands to this. Let me lend my creative thinking and problem solving and help you still make this the best show that it can be.
Absolutely.
And I think like it's just like really special that you don't always see other places.
Yeah, I think that's what's really impressed me about sort of Mad Horse when I've been able to be a part of it is watching you all figure things out in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you've been part of Mad Horse since 2015. And so what was that journey from ensemble member to artistic director?
Yeah. So let's see. Where do I start? When I first joined the company 2015, which is really crazy. I'm like have to wrap my brain around that date right now. I think it was like obviously like a little bit slow for me, but as we over the past like I would say like 6 or 7 years, I think that's where we were hitting like a natural transition spot within the organization. Really thinking about how we not like necessarily like divide power, but also like divide responsibilities. So things are not always falling on one person's shoulder. Because I think anybody who is trying to head any type of organization knows like that can really be a lot. And there's so much about Mad Horse in particular that's also volunteer driven. And so we're not like always necessarily being paid for efforts that you don't see behind the scenes. And so when all of that responsibility falls on one person, it can be extremely overwhelming, and burnout is very, very real. And in the spirit of trying to take care of both like ourselves as individuals, but also for just like taking care of each other and taking care of the organization, we started slowly shifting into, we were calling it like the multi-headed monster
Yeah.
kind of model, looking at, I think it was might have been the Azuka Theater was an example where they had um, multiple leadership roles within the organization. And so there's like a lot of talk and examination of how those things work. There's obviously some trial and error, but that kind of work started to really excite me because, yeah, it's very overwhelming and hard to think like I have to hold all of this by myself. So I really kind of started transitioning during like, I would say like that transition era of going from company member to be like, oh, well, I can see ways that I can support the current leadership. And I kind of was like started to shift through there because we were really like breaking down what everybody was doing. Um, so it was like definitely like a several year, several season process of observing and working together in this new model that kind of helped get me to where I am now and feel like I could maybe step in and do something like this, which sometimes I'm still like, am I crazy?
I mean, obviously being an artistic director always requires some level of psychosis because I feel like there's so many balls that you need to juggle. And to be able to do that, what does the current sort of leadership model look like under your stewardship? Like, what does that sort of currently look like?
Right. So right now, so we have our leadership within company. So there's me as the artistic director, and then we have these two other support manager positions. So it's still like I would say like a 3-person. We really try to put our heads together. We have a company manager and then kind of like a technical building manager within our ensemble. Also, really thinking of like how are we covering the bases of the company and the organization? How are we fitting the needs of the resident ensemble? How are we being the stewards of our building? How are we creating and curating the season with our audiences and artists that we're working with? But on top of those 3 positions, we also have our board. So we work very closely with our president, vice president, treasurer, to also have like that investment in everything. And so while the company makes all of the artistic decisions, the board still has like the support and buy-in. It has some like really excellent insights to help us in those moments when we're like, how do we get to pull this off? Or like, here's something really crazy. So there is a lot of support and really thinking again, yeah, how do we kind of divide some of those responsibilities?
That's great. I mean, typical organizations typically divide sort of like the service side of things, the marketing, the fundraising, all of
Mhm.
that sort of falls upon, a board or sort of an executive leadership position, and then sort of artistic directions from the other side. So
Yeah.
it's nice to hear that you're sort of evolving in a similar model.
Yeah, and we do still share a lot of those responsibilities across everything. Like our board definitely helps support with some of the fundraising, but we also have committee structures within our organization that both company and board members serve on. And so we do have like a grants and fundraising committee whose whole focus gets to be that. So again, where it's not like every single person has to have their hands in everything, but especially people with specific skill sets, they can kind of pick and choose. We have our audience engagement that
Mhm.
helps handle like the marketing and then like our building maintenance and all of that because we have that historic building to take care of.
Absolutely. So, for those of people who don't know, right, tell us a little bit about this historic building, perhaps how you landed there, how you got there, because it is a special little building in South Portland in a residential neighborhood. So, if you could share with us, like, what does that building look like? Anything you want to offer.
Yes. So we currently operate fully out of the historic Hutchins School, which is located in Ferry Village. If folks are familiar with South Portland, we are true neighbors with Lyric Music Theater. We're right around the corner from each other. But this is originally a schoolhouse that was built in I think it was the 1870s, if I'm remembering some of this history correctly. And it remained a schoolhouse actually for almost 100 years and
Mm.
was a pretty important part of the full South Portland community and neighborhood. And the reason it is called the Hutchins School is one of the early teachers there who transitioned into being assistant principal and then principal. The building was renamed after her for all of her stewardship for education. Um, but eventually, as things can happen, as the building went kind of became empty, was not being used, and then one of our previous artistic directors, Christine Louise Marshall, who also happens to live in that Fairy Village neighborhood, took notice and reached out to the city and said, "Hey, what could happen if we as a theater took this space over?" So while we do not own the building, we lease it. We have been essential stewards of it since 2009, and a lot of the work and the renovations have been on the shoulders of the ensemble and company. It originally, when it was first absorbed with the company, it was kind of functioning as like rehearsal space and storage space, and we were still leasing and working with another physical space that no longer exists in Portland called Lucid Stage. And due to some business things on their end, that full building and contract went under in 2012. And it was one of those, here's how Mad Horse making it work is that season was starting, like rehearsals were underway. That space for the whole season was gone. And the company pivoted and converted our rehearsal room into the functioning black box that it is today. So we've been working like full time and really functioning full time out of there since 2012.
That's incredible. I mean, it's such a sort of unique space.
Mhm.
What are some of the challenges of sort of moving into a building? And obviously, you've had many years with this, but like moving into a building where there are structures in place. It's not your typical theater. It is a school, right? From my previous experience, there's a giant pole in the middle of the room that you have to
Yes,
sort of,
polls.
deal with. Like, what are some of sort of the challenges that you've found, sort of like existing within an existing, non-theatrical space?
Mhm. I think the poles that you mentioned are a big part of it. They are load bearing. Again, like, do we have them in the theater? We have them in the lobby, and it is possible to get them removed, but it's such a costly endeavor that financially it's just um, not something that we can quite handle, and it would be like needing to really rethink and what's that capital campaign, right? But some of the other things are just the quirks of being in an old building, which can come down to some warped flooring or some wacky wiring. I think we've been very lucky. We've been working with a local electrician. His name is Curtis, who also happens to have a background in theater, and he's been so helpful with us in making sure our grid is functioning, is safe, that outlets are correct, and all of that, working within the constraints of like a historic building in a residential neighborhood, old materials and wiring, and then like bringing in modern lights and making sure that these systems can all support each other. And so we're very grateful to him. But yeah, I think some of these challenges of an old building, of course, there's also with this intimate space, there's some limitations in seating and how many bodies we can safely pack in per fire codes, which we don't, not maybe not everybody thinks about. Hi, Bean.
I think, there is something beautiful about the intimacy of the space that I
Mhm.
think really makes the type of theater that you do really in your face. Like it is a really sort of intimate setting where you are perhaps, knee to knee, face to face with the actors
Mhm.
directly. And there's something present, something immediate about the work that you all do. Do you
Yes.
find that the selection of a season, perhaps, is impacted by the space itself from which you work?
Yeah, it's absolutely something that we think about during our we sort of have a rubric that we work from during our play selection process, which lasts like all year essentially. Like we're always reading plays, thinking about what suits the artists in the ensemble, what are the texts bringing forward as like conversations that we as artists get to have with each other or with our audience, or what do we hope to elicit as conversations for our audiences. But the space demands and like technical demands are a big thing that always come into consideration, which can be kind of good or bad. Like, because we also have to really approach things being like, this is never going to feel like a proscenium show, but
Mhm.
how could it be adapted how can we think creatively? Whereas like, how do you think outside the box to fit it into our little box?
Yeah,
um,
along those lines, I
mhm.
want to take it back to leadership for a moment
Sure.
and say, like, sort of stepping into a box and out of a box, right? Like, and that sort of navigation there. Like, what do you find was, hardest or most interesting about stepping into a room where everybody already knew you, right? Like, everybody already knew you. You were already a member for years. Like, what is that transition like, right? In a sort of like position where you've been a member, you've had a leadership position, and then now you have a new leadership position. Like, what is that experience like?
Um, it has not been. I mean, it has been scary, but not as scary as I thought it would be.
Mm,
Um, Part of it, I think, is I had already kind of been in, this support leadership position, and as we were, through our leadership, everyone has terms, and so knowing that there was going to be a transitional term, and when Mark Rubin was like, "I want to stay in the company, but I'm ready to like relinquish some of this responsibility and really just get to focus on the art more." Um, and so it was like company wide conversations and there was a lot of encouragement. So it's like a lot of people already kind of being like, "So are you gonna do this thing?" And I was like, "Oh, like, do you want me to?" So I think there was like already a lot of support going into that.
mhm,
Um, but something that's so unique about being a member of the ensemble before moving in is I've had all this time now to work so closely with everyone. Um, so I think that actually made it a little bit easier to transition into this role instead of coming in as like like completely fresh unknown.
mhm,
Um, because now at this point it's like I know the how people's different quirks work or some simple things of like um how different thinking styles are and different communication styles and really trying to just being able to pay attention and use those observations to um I'm hoping always like streamline and open communication. Like I try to keep things like very transparent. And while it is like, if it comes down to it, like it would be my decision at the end of the day, but there's still like a very democratic atmosphere at Mad Horse where we really want to try to have it feel like a group decision. And there's like full ensemble buy-in and that consideration of everybody in the room. But I definitely had a lot of support from everyone, even before kind of throwing my name in to potentially take this over. And then there is a vote. So it was also like they did vote me in. I wasn't just like, "It's mine now."
Of course, of course.
I think if I did, then I'd be like, "That's a red flag."
I think that would be very much against what we know about Mad Horse, for
Yeah.
those of us who are local. Obviously, as you sort of stepped into leadership, like there's always this idea of like, okay, obviously I'm inheriting something. I'm taking on this sort of responsibility.
Mhm.
Um, but was there something that you changed perhaps early that you felt like either made you nervous, you were really excited to do?
Oh, that's really great. Yeah, the inheriting something has been it's still I feel like that's always just gonna be sitting there and, like, be a weight in the back of my mind. But kind of as I mentioned, like, my learning my own I think, like, there's been a learning process of my own kind of, like, style and needs, I guess, and I find that I really crave, just like I really crave transparency through decision making, whether
Mhm,
I'm in the leadership position or I'm the like employer, the anybody else, and I've noticed like with several other folks that we work with, like they also kind of crave that. So I really tried to come in and kind of reshape and open the rooms up in a maybe like slightly different way about how we can have some like keep things transparent, but also have some, like, open and honest conversations. Because I think one of the hardest things that we do as artists is to be able to provide constructive feedback and criticism, and when there's times where it has to be, like, if something didn't work, maybe, like, how do we deliver that instead of brushing it aside or saying, like, "Oh, well, we'll figure it out later," like, "We'll do better next time," like, how do we say, like, "No, no, no, like, let's address it and learn from it," and, because that can be really, really scary, and
mhm.
even with the best intentions, sometimes that kind of feedback can feel really, really hard, especially when we're in these group settings, in these rooms all together creatively working, so no one feels like they're being like chastised or called out. Because I think also as an artist, like we always need to be learning and growing, and it is like an important part of that growth. And so I'm still always, I think, a work in progress. But I think, and it actually almost like Zoom and virtual meetings, I think actually really helped us in this regard, like leaning in,
Mhm.
because there's that inherent politeness that needs to come from like Zoom window to Zoom window, because there's a lag and you need to listen in a different way. And I think like over the past several years, that helped us slow down and be able to listen to each other a little bit more. And I think we're now starting to be able to have some more of those, like the tougher artist conversations of like accountability and when we need to ask for help. And again, like it can be scary sometimes, but it's also like really, really exciting to know that we can trust each other enough to hear or receive feedback, knowing that like the intention is to always make each other better, because we see that already. It's not to like ever bring someone down.
I love that idea that technology actually empowered us to communicate better as theater artists, because too often obviously AI is terrible. We don't want to use it. We don't want to employ it. But there is something beautiful about that sort of virtual space because of the lag, because of the
Mhm.
constraints of the technology, that it forces us to listen in a different way. I love having productions meeting Zoom because I don't have to like put on pants, but you know,
Right? Like
obviously
you're in your pajamas.
you're in your pajamas. It's a less stressful. You have your coffee nearby. I'm always a big fan of that. That's so wonderful. I think back on those days when we used to have postmortems in college or after productions,
Mhm.
when that used to be like sort of like we need to sit down in a room, lock ourselves in, and let everybody air their grievances all at once. And it feels like there it didn't feel structured. And so it felt like it was just a terrible time for everyone involved. But it sounds like Zoom actually provided a space to structure it, to
Yeah.
balance it in a better way.
Yeah, and and there was and it's like mad horse over the many years of postmortems have kind of come and gone, but it's been something lately that we've been really working to bring back. And and part of that was also still like under when Mark was still leading us. So there were some really great just structural questions that he found really helpful that we still implement. And a lot of it is like, we'll do some of the overall like popcorn style feedback of like, hey, what worked? What didn't work? What was a challenge? But we always try to finish it of like in this way of like, um, what was lacking? What did you learn? What did you love? And I think like kind of framing it in a kind of like a positive light almost. And like we just did a postmortem for the minutes on Tuesday. And there was a lot to celebrate, but we also got to, I think, finish in a very healthy way to be like, hey, here are some challenges that we faced that sometimes we didn't quite accomplish, but like, let's start brainstorming what we could do next time. And I think like um, having just that are like personal accountability of each other. And I think, yeah, some like very structured, healthy ways to be able to share feedback and experiences that isn't like, it is not judgmental. It's truly like, we just got to learn and like address it sometimes. But it's been, everyone's been very willing to have those conversations.
That's so great. Let's take a short break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about sort of stewarding this, 39 plus year company. We've been talking to Allison McCall, artistic director of Mad Horse Theater Company. This is Forge Theater Labs. We'll be right back.
At Forge Theater Labs, we're building bold, imaginative theater, supporting new artists, new stories, and new ways of experiencing performance. We're proud to share that Forge Theater Labs is now a sponsored project of Fractured Atlas, which means your donations are tax deductible and directly support the creation of this podcast, live tapings, and artist-driven projects. If our work has inspired you, made you think, or brought you closer to the theater community, we invite you to help keep it going. You can make a donation by visiting forgetheaterlabs.com for our link to our Fractured Atlas page. Every contribution, big or small, helps us forge new pathways for artists and audiences alike. Thank you for being part of our community.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Josh Hsu, and this is Forge Theater Labs, and we're talking to Allison McCall, Artistic Director of Mad Horse Theater Company. Today, we're sort of focused a little bit on legacy, mission, and what it takes to sustain a long-running ensemble. And so I thought we might turn it to your mission and your identity as a company. Mad Horse has been, quote, compassionately examining the human experience since 1986. And so as you sort of look at your role as a leader, how do you interpret that mission today in your programming?
I think a big part of that as we look at our programming from season to season is thinking about how many different voices and stories that we can present on stage. We really strive to hopefully to make it so our seasons don't feel one note. And in part of the work that we select and we can dive a little bit deeper is oftentimes also looking at pieces and scenarios and characters that are not comfortable and having those opportunities to explore scenarios, ways of thinking that don't always align with who we are. And I think a big part of that, right? Like theater is such an integral social emotional tool, not just for young people getting started, but I think it's still such a valuable tool for adults and as a resource for any community because through the power of telling stories, right? Like we can be building this empathy and looking at people and examining situations that don't necessarily reflect who we are, maybe doesn't always reflect how we think or would agree, but by being able to give some platforms to these different perspectives, we're also able to start creating conversation and dialogue because almost like how Zoom helped us listen to each other better as a company, as an audience member sitting and listening, you're able to kind of maybe hear some points and perspectives that you wouldn't get in a normal conversation. And we hope sometimes that we can take that back into the real world, whether it's like the conversations you're having in the car with your theater buddy afterwards, or maybe it's weeks or months down the road where something that you saw or heard is reflected in a conversation you're having with family or colleagues or someone at the grocery store, and providing some of those tools to be able to maybe bridge some communication and perspectives. And especially I think looking at works and characters in some storylines that can be, again, like challenge some of our own belief systems and moral codes, by us also presenting them as honestly as possible. It's an opportunity for us to examine and look at them without judgment. And I think that's, especially right now, feels so crucial because there's just so much contention in the world. And it is like, I think like I can definitely say that I am guilty of it, of like, you see or hear something and it can just rile up some emotions and you start to make a snap decision. And we don't always get to sit back and like think logically because it's just, we're being bombarded. And so theater as a whole, and I think specifically like the work that we do at Mad Horse is a way to try to bring some empathy and some surprise to us and challenge our own ways of thinking sometimes.
Absolutely. I think, like in a culture where we talk about like, everything's like a 20-second clip, like being able to sit through a theatrical experience allows us to sort of like garner that perspective, like chew it down, hopefully before we leave the room, right? Unless we're like super offended by something we see, but which can happen. But, I think this idea of like being able to absorb the entire experience and then having time to process it allows us that chance for perspective with theater.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
looking at this season,
Mhm.
right? Like, what have you sort of chewed on as you're thinking about the season as a whole? Like this season, you did really the squirrels, the minutes, an empty plate in the Cafe du Gourmet Boeuf, which is coming up.
Yes.
There's a clear through line of like this existential and sometimes absurd quality to life. Like, how intentional is that tonal identity to you or perhaps to Mad Horse?
Um, Again, great question. We have found lately in some of our season selection process, it sort of seems like there's almost this organic thing that happens in the types of plays that we're reading and the stories that we personally are all drawn to in the moment. So as we were narrowing things down and selecting these titles, it really wasn't until truly like giant sticky note paper on the wall, putting like colorful stickers on, like voting on favorites and having these conversations about them that we started to realize that there was a very strong through line about legacy and memory that was kind of tying all of these together, which then felt very appropriate for our 40th season. And we've had stuff like that happen in many seasons before, where there seems to be like a sudden surprise through line that can be um, a little bit unintentional. And but I think also that helps make it feel very Mad Horse in that intention is while we do have that through line, we strive to then have titles that don't feel one note. And so this opportunity through season 40, while we get to reflect on what 40 years of Mad Horse means and this legacy that has been the foundation for us for now, like I think there's ways that all of that is reflected in these titles that we have chosen, but it's also that dynamic of each show has such a different flavor that no matter which one you come to, it is not going to be the same experience. So you also still get to come in and be a bit surprised.
I'm going to press you on this. Have you had a programming moment over the last 2 years where you thought this is either such a Mad Horse show or inversely, like completely off the rails? Like, what are we doing? This is not in our wheelhouse. Like, have you ever had that moment for a show?
Oh, absolutely. I think most recently is truly the squirrels. Um, and Jake, our director, Jake Cody, who directed it, he wrote about it in his director's note. I think it was like even part of his directing pitch to lead that show, where he was like, "This show scares the shit out of me. It's so big and so boisterous. How is it going to fit into our space? How am I going to essentially like tame it down, but also like not tame it because we need it to be so big?" But I think again, what makes it for us when we, as fellow horsies, we're also like, oh, does the show feel impossible for us to do? Maybe that's a reason that we should try to do it, because it forces this like really creative thinking. Also, several years ago, we did Mr. Burns, a post-electric play, another pretty large show to try to fit in our space and be like, how are we going to create this 3-act opera with music that's kind of created from scratch with like polite suggestions from the writers?
That's incredible. You know, for those of you who don't know The Squirrels, who are listening, The Squirrels is a play by Robert Askins. It's got like 3 women, 3 men, right? Like approximately. There's a cast of 6, I think.
Or wait, oh my God.
Is it 6 or 7? Anyway, basically,
I think 6.
6, right? It's about sort of 2 camps of squirrels, actual squirrels, and they basically like fight over resources, right? And it's kind of like this like soap opera that's kind of like epic at the same time. They get into wars, battles, and it's about this idea of like what you inherit, what you pass down from generation to generation, and whether these battles are generational. And it's so absurd because they're actually squirrels on a stage at the same time. And obviously, Mr. Burns, you know, if you want to fill us in, what is Mr. Burns Electric?
Yes. So Mr. Burns, a post-electric play, happens after a not so distant nuclear disaster. So Act 1, we meet a group of survivors who have just banded together in the woods and to pass the time and to lift their spirits, they are trying to recreate an episode of The Simpsons from memory. So it is the beginning of storytelling of a group of people telling a common story around a campfire. And through the course of the play, this level, like the storytelling and theatricality becomes the currency and means of survival. So we meet them again in Act 2, where they have become a traveling artistic group, again, around this episode of The Simpsons, and there's now production value in competition. And so there's that sense of community that you find in theater and in this storytelling that's going to keep everybody alive. But there's also those power dynamics of the troupe as well. And then we jump in we jump another 70 years into the future, where the survival pastime into true survival has now become a pageant play, the same way we might see like the nativity acted out at Christmas every year. It is now a fully stylized operatic version of what's this? Is it Cape Dread in The Simpsons episode? But it's like, yes, this completely stylized major opera of an episode of The Simpsons, remembered and performed by people who now did not exist when that was first aired. So that's also like it's just this like homage to oral storytelling and what we do as artists.
It's so wild because like at the same time that you're doing shows like The Squirrels, like Mr. Burns, there's also, you know, a deeper and darker and more emotional, intimate aspect to some of the plays that you pick. And, you know, I'm thinking about the play that you directed this year, Really, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that play? And I'd love to talk to you about your experience as a director on that.
Yes. So I directed Really by Jackie Sibley's Drury, which is a very, I would say a pretty quiet examination of artistic legacy and our own responsibility to memory. So for anyone who doesn't know, the whole of the show takes place during a singular photography session in a mediocre apartment in New York City. And it's between two women who are remembering the same man who has passed away. So we meet Calvin's mom and we meet his former girlfriend who essentially found him. And they are both grappling for how like their own relationship with him and like how they still matter through what he achieved as an artist. But there's the like mother ownership, the friend and romantic ownership, and then there's this question about the art that he did and their responsibility to continue it or cherish it. And I know I think this show was an interesting risk for us to start our season with, because World of Squirrels is definitely like, that's the bang of the, again, Really is a bit quieter. It's a 3-person show. It can get very introspective, but it was also, I think, a really, really exciting way to really link what artistic legacy means and what our responsibility is to that.
You know, it's so interesting because, you know, obviously as you're going into 40 and you're talking about legacy, you know, and you are taking over as artistic director, right? Like, how did that project land differently for you? Like, what resonated to you specifically about that play? Like, was it perhaps the characters? Was it the intimacy? Was it the thematic principles? And, you know, how did that inform your direction?
Yeah. What excited me, I think, the most about it actually was the photography of everything, because the play itself, even described by the playwright, is itself a photograph. We were seeing this momentary snapshot in time. And a little known fact about me is I actually have a background in art history. So an opportunity, it was just such an excellent and exciting opportunity to combine these two loves of mine, that of bringing photography and this history of photography and art and bringing and tying it into theater. And I think they actually really marry together in a surprising way that folks don't always think about. Um, but the way we look at a photograph or even a film, right? Like we have the four corners, the framework that the photographer or the director uses the camera lens to tell us exactly where to look. And it is the same responsibility as us as theater directors. Our frame might look a little bit different depending what type of theater we are in, but we are still guiding our audience to watch a particular story and to engage in something um, that we get to shape a lot of their experience with. And so that I really tried to think about that a lot through the process and be like, how can we create something that's very, very rich so they can find a lot of details, but also still stay like with a very strong through line. So we're following um, this story that weaves back and forth between the present moment and our memories of this person.
What I loved was how seamless it was, like, that I didn't realize that we were moving through time until it happened, and,
Hmm.
I think that was the sort of beauty of your framing in sort of guiding us from sort of moment to moment. It's sort of like, instead of feeling like I was going through a snapshot in time, I definitely feel like I was going through a reel in time. Like, it was like someone rewinding that camera, that old-fashioned camera for anybody who had one of those, and sort of,
Hmm.
like, watching the sort of transformations there. As a director, what did you find, any discoveries that you learned, like, for the first time, like, getting in front, like, of an actor and, like, being able to, like, step away from acting or, artistic leadership? Like, how was that different for you?
Yeah. I have directed before, primarily the majority of my direction has actually been in children's theater, and I feel like I'm very comfortable with, like, the educational direction
Mhm.
of work and like, the process over product. So something I did have to say a lot to the cast where I was like, "If it feels like I am talking down to you or if I'm over explaining it, like, please call me out. It's just, like, the weird teacher brain taking over." But, I think I also had such a lovely team to work with, and my actors were so excited and thoughtful and curious. So we did actually have, like, r I think really, really strong ongoing conversations. We started with, some table work, but a lot of my kind of directing style, I think more with adults is also just it's just rooted in trust in the room, and, where I don't wanna say, like, I'm a hands-off director, but what I try to do is come in to be like, "Here's a vision. I would like to establish this scaffolding, but think of this scaffolding as your playground, and let's, like, shape and play, and I trust the decisions that you're going to make, and really, like, how do we work together where it's not like, I need you to do X, Y, and Z because I'm the director and I said so." Sometimes there would definitely be moments, again, like, if you're in our space, it's a tricky space. So sometimes it'd be like, "Hey, let's find a motivation because, like, man, you've been upstage for too long and we can't see you anymore. Like, so we gotta get an opportunity for you to move," but we got to, like, work together and really collaborate, and I think this, helped, like, enforce, I guess, for me that I was like, "I am a collaborator." And I got some very nice feedback, um, also from our actors that it felt like a very gentle process, which I thought was just such a generous thing to say because they were all doing such incredible work and, like, they were off book, like, halfway through even blocking and then would, like, apologize, and I was like, We haven't even put it on its feet. What are you doing?" But, um, I think I think it's just we were able to make it feel like every single person in the room, design team and actors alike, like, they had a voice, and where it was able to be like, "You can have a voice, we can be collaborative, but we can still make decisions in a really smart way and still tell a really strong story." Because one of my personal philosophies is just, like, stress isn't gonna make something better,
Mm.
and so
Mhm.
I would definitely try to alleviate, like, I had my own, like, personal, like at home work to alleviate stress on myself. But I was also like, you as an artist are not going to come to the room and do your best work if you are feeling really, really stressed. So it's like, what can we do to alleviate that? Is it my communication style? Do we need priorities? But I think kind of just trying to lead with like some care. And and I think sometimes it can be that like, you don't have to suffer to make good art. And I felt kind of validated through that process of like, we didn't suffer to make good art. Even with some very heavy material, we were able to like take care and trust each other and tell, I think, a really, really beautiful story. And then at the end of the day, my biggest problem was like, my artists just wanted to sit around and hang out and talk to each other because they enjoyed what they were doing. And I was like, I need everyone to go home.
I think that's such a sort of transformational thing. I think, especially after the pandemic, is that, and obviously at different levels, like we don't need to suffer to make art, right? Like that is, the tortured artist thing, I think sort of fed into so many sort of models of like how we direct, how we convince actors or manipulate actors to perform a certain way or put them through emotional torture in order to produce a good response or put ourselves through emotional torture to create.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how much pressure have you put on yourself where you're like, well, am I doing serious work if I'm laughing right now? And it's like, well, I have to be really serious and like, and it's like, I don't want it to do that to ourselves because one of my professors back in college, this was like the phrase that I feel like saved my life as an artist, but she was like, we're putting on a play. I just want to watch you play. And I was like, but I'm stressed out. Like, what if I do something wrong? And she was like, who cares? We're playing. Don't worry about it. And I was like, I have permission to not worry about it. But I try to like bring that in as much as possible.
I came from such a different academic background where it was like everybody was a tortured artist.
Yes,
so
I was very much leading into that. I was like, no, but like I have to be very like meticulous and I have to be on it. And she was like, or just don't. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to make a mistake. We'll fix it later. And I was like, what?
I think that's something I discovered later in life as I was like, I want to do this because I want to have fun. Like, remember fun?
Yeah.
Like, there's fun in this. And I think there's a beauty in that. And I think that sort of resembles your leadership style is like making sure that everybody's voice is heard, everybody's included, and they want to be in the room. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more. I'm kind of excited to talk a little bit about the future of Mad Horse and where you see it going during your tenure. You've been listening to Forge Theater Labs. We're talking to Allison McCall. We'll be right back. Want to get your brand in front of a passionate, creative, and engaged audience? Forge Theater Labs is looking for partners to sponsor this podcast and join us in bringing bold, innovative theater to life. If you'd like to place an ad right here, reach out to us at marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. It's a simple, powerful way to support the arts while sharing your message with listeners who care about creativity and community. Again, that's marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. Let's build something extraordinary together. So we've been talking a lot about sort of your sort of experience this past season, sort of choosing a season. I think we sort of want to pivot towards talking about the future. And I think before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the past. There is something unique about Mad Horse that they've been experimenting with, which is a pay what you can model, which as a producer makes me so nervous. It makes me kind of like, it gives me like heartburn inside a little bit. But Mad Horse operates entirely on a pay what you decide model. Like, how did you get there? How did you land there? How does it work? I'm sure many people in our listening audience is going, what? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, happy to. I think I'm so excited by this model. Before we moved entirely to it, we still, again, for many, many years, Mad Horse would have pay what you can performances sprinkled throughout each production run. So it's not something that was like unusual to us. And I think for the audience base that we had the foundation with, it was something that they understood. But again, where the pandemic changed so much was that was when we really started considering moving fully to a pay what you decide. We did it our first year was like when we kind of shifted to everything happening virtually,
Mhm.
because so many of us were either like losing work or on restricted hours, and just, like across the board budgets were becoming very, very tight. And so we really started to think about like, well, what are ways that we can still gather and find community, even if it's virtually, that doesn't have a financial barrier behind it? Because that just, I think, even just like for our own mental health, like that's what we just needed, was to be there with each other. And so, and I think also, again, like a lot of what we were doing virtually, it was some volunteer time. We would do a lot of things via donation, either to Mad Horse or to fellow artists who would be joining us to if folks wanted to like tip them and compensate them directly. Um, but that just felt really important, and we've been very lucky that we've built a strong relationship with the Azuka Theater, and they actually operate on an entirely pay what you decide ticketing model. And so during this time, it was with Mark Rubin as our artistic director. He really led the charge with this vision, and he had his proposal. We worked very closely with Azuka, and we're like, hey, let's try one season and see how it goes. And so our first full real season back was the 2021-2022 season, where we were also operating on limited audience capacity as we were still working through some safety guidelines. Um, but what we really discovered during that first season, and I think some of it came from just the community's excitement to being back in person together, was a true spike in generosity that was incredible. And so while sometimes we could have patrons coming in who could be like, "Hey, all I got is $3." We'd have others who are like, "Well, I have the means, here's 50." And as we've gone through these past, I think like almost like 6 years now, um, it's we've seen that the same kind of pendulum swing of the payments, where we actually like meet in the middle in terms of ticket averages.
Mm.
But what's been really beneficial with this model in particular is, because there is now the removed cost barrier, even if it's a couple dollars coming in, that's still a seat sold that would have been $0. And that's a person who's now come in who can talk about what they saw in their experience and encourage more people to come. And it really is like word of mouth is still like just as generous, because that really helps get butts in seats. Like, you want people talking about what's happening. Um, and so, yeah, we've been able to keep going under that so far. And it's been, uh, like, we turn a profit. It's really exciting. It's definitely, you are not the only one to be like, what are you doing? That's so scary. But so far it's been really, really working for us.
Of course. And, I want to add that, Forge Theater Labs, as much as I am scared of pay what you can model, all of our live events are also pay what you can. And so there is that, in terms of structure, right? I want to sort of dig down into the sort of more labby elements of it, like the really, like practical elements.
Mhm.
Like, you also do require a reservation. It's not like, oh, let me show up and hopefully I'll have a seat. You do require reservations, and that does benefit, someone's attendance, right?
Yes, yes, and that was actually something we needed to, like, as this learning curve, because, over the past several years, there's been, yes, a lot of growing pains, and so some of it was because you don't have a financial obligation, a lot of times folks would make a reservation and then not show up, but because our space is so intimate, we don't have the luxury of just adding as many seats as possible, because we physically don't have the space to put them. Um, it was then kind of like, oh, well, this reservation, just a hold, would take a seat away from somebody who wanted to show if you weren't showing. Um, but it was also like very transparently through the ticketing platform that we were using. They wound up having some secret charges where every online reservation was adding up to something that we would have to pay later that we had no idea about. And so we were really unhappily surprised with some like kind of gnarly bills. And we really went back and forth talking about like, while we finished this current contract and like research someone new to hopefully not surprise us, we're like, how do we guarantee butts and seats without making it an insurmountable amount? And so what we did was we really looked at like, we started averaging the online processing fees and those totals and then breaking it down per show. And that's where we were kind of finding that, and again, the goal to keep it affordable. So we're like keeping it under $5. You're still saying like, I'm going to be here. It doesn't necessarily like and right now it's at a $4 processing fee. It's like, if you don't show, it's not quite the same of being like, well, I just spent $50 that I'm not getting back. Like that kind of financial commitment doesn't seem like as scary as it could be. And that's kind of helped us just on the business end really even some things out from a budget perspective. I know thrilling stuff, the budget.
Yes. No,
But-
understandably, but I think this is what we need to do, right? We need to sort of worry about how we get butts and seats, if not dollars in our bank accounts to keep
Right.
on making art.
Yeah, it's like we want the arts for art's sake, but at the same time, like there is that aspect, like theater still is a business. And so right now with the $4 reservation, it definitely helps. But to even if to kind of still try to support in a way where it's like, even if that $4 could be a barrier, because again, like we're across the bridge over in South Portland. Transportation over there is not as convenient when you're on Peninsula. There can be so many more costs to going to a theater besides the simple ticket sale. So with every performance, we do have a handful of walk-in tickets available that then have no financial obligation. And then we also have our waitlist systems. So there can be opportunities where like, hey, I really want to go to this show. I can't spend $4 right now. Can I join a wait list? Or this one is full and I want to join a wait list. And that's also a way that we can make sure we get people in with some really active box office and front of house communication to try to welcome folks in as well.
I have a question. Since switching to the pay what you can model, have you learned anything about the different types of audiences, like the demographics of audiences? Like, has that shifted for Mad Horse? Because, I think theater is an aging art form. Thanks, Timothée Chalamet, for calling us out. But, like our demographics, need to adjust, need to change. Has that sort of provided more opportunities for younger people in your audiences? Like, have you noticed that shift in your demographics?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons, I swear this will divulge into the same answer. I think one of the reasons we've been able to successfully transition into a pay what you decide is, again, like this legacy of Mad Horse. There was already a following. So we weren't launching this very new concept to into the void. Like we've been very lucky to have a very strong foundation on which to do that with. But now because we've been able, I think the price barriers and the nature of the titles that we pick, we're absolutely seeing a shift in demographics. We're seeing a lot more students, like high school students and college students coming through, which is really, really exciting. I think some of that is also not just on Mad Horse. I want to praise those educators who are really encouraging young people to also get out and see things early but knowing that there's this resource where it's like, hey, you don't have to break your dorm room budget to get there is really awesome. But something else with this model in particular that we are seeing is every season we have new waves of people finding us. So something that we've talked about, right, is the like, wow, it seems like no matter how much we say it, we still will see some certain patterns of like no shows for these reservations and like how the wait list works. But I was like, I think what that means though, which is like truly thrilling from that audience building perspective, is it means like we are consistently building new audiences. So we're not re-educating the same people over and over necessarily. Like we are
Mm.
educating a new wave with each season, with each show. And that makes it so sometimes when you're like, I think I've said this before, where you're like, oh, but I'm saying it because you're new, it's really exciting.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and again, like the power of word of mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also speaks to sort of what I see with your other mission, which is, while you are an ensemble-based company, you do have guest artists regularly
Hmm.
join you throughout the season, right? Obviously, as an ensemble, you have a shorthand, you have a way of working together. How do you help like newer guest artists integrate into your system and your ecosystem?
Oh, that's a really great question. And I think it is that thing of like walking a fine line because we're small and mighty, but it is still like professional theater with some pretty high expectations, but also being like, how do we meet new people and yeah, and like break down some of those barriers and get everybody in. And so, and I think it's again, like it's always a work in progress, but we really look at when we build out production teams, trying to be as intentional as possible to balance out existing company members with fresh voices. Or if there's company and guest, like when can we have balance with some returning guest artists who've kind of been like, oh, I understand how this works and I can help model and show the ropes, because I think it could be like completely overwhelming in such a wacky and challenging space with some wacky and challenging material to come in and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's overwhelming and it doesn't set people up for success. And as challenging as things can be, um, and as like punchy as the material can sometimes be, like we don't want we don't want it to alienate the artist. Like we want to see everybody coming through our doors succeeding. And
Mhm.
we want every show to be a success. We want every artist to feel proud and supported. So I think it's like setting expectations early in rehearsal processes, and trying to set up teams that can mentor and support and communicate well together has been some pretty important things. And we sometimes like some are stronger than others, and it's always again like a learning curve and like all these different combinations of life happening. But that's like the big thing is like, how do we create teams that can balance like fresh voices and like the seasoned horsies in there to like rise up together.
Fantastic. Was there something, as we start to wrap up, you
Hmm.
know, I'm interested to see, like, what's something that perhaps leadership taught you that you perhaps didn't see coming? Like something that surprised you from your first 2 years, like anything that you can share.
Oh my gosh, there's so much. um, I think on like a really like just for me very personally, this has been a really a pretty amazing journey of like my own self-discovery and like my own voice, and the fact that people will listen, people want to listen, and it was like, "Oh, do I have something worth contributing?" Which seems so silly, but,
Mhm.
um but I think a lot of it just, like, boils down to trust where I really I'm so lucky with this group because I know these people so well. We really there's so much that functions like a funny family, but, where it was like, I learned I knew how much I trusted the rest of my ensemble, but this has been a really big lesson of how much they trust me, both in, like, making decisions, but also um, to be able to come forward and be like, "Hey, I have a question. Hey, something feels weird. Hey, I wanna talk about something hard." And I
Mhm.
think that's, like, um, kind of surprising, and especially because we have such a broad age demographic in our company
Mhm.
that, it feels like we're all always on equal footing.
Mm.
And I felt that way as an ensemble member, but I was like, "Am I gonna feel super weird and different as a leader?" And sometimes I still do, and I probably, like, always will. Um, but some of that, like trust has been really amazing to kind of like this like revelation that probably shouldn't be a revelation. But I feel like that's like my very sweet answer. And there's just like the rest is just some of the like, oh my God, I have to think about the taxes.
Always
Which
the
is
fun part of
boring,
leadership.
yeah, the really boring.
Yes, absolutely. As we head into this, we just finished the season, of course.
Right, where I was like, "Oh, I need to make sure everything is submitted."
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. Looking ahead, is there something that you want to build for Mad Horse during your tenure? Like, what are some sort of like initiatives, thoughts about where you might be headed? You know.
Oh my God, well, I definitely wanna see our, uh, pay what you decide ticketing model continue. I wanna, it feels very, very important to me to keep the financial barrier down. Something I also wanna keep working with our board and finance committees is to also be able to continue raising compensation for our artists. And, right now we're in a stipend model. And it still feels very modest, but actually over the past couple of years in comparison, like it has grown exponentially, which is like really exciting. But it feels like there's always a bit further we would like to go to be a bit more competitive, because the folks who do come through our doors, whether they're company members or guest artists, everyone comes in with such passion and dedication and are so thoughtful and talented, where yes, we want to be making good art, but it does still feel really important to be able to compensate people for that time, for that expertise, for their contributions. And so a big thing I want to keep pushing and working on definitely is like some of the artist compensation to be a bit more competitive and feel like it reflects like the level of work and integrity that we get to see every day.
Absolutely, and I think that's a worthy mission across all artistic organizations,
Yes,
including my own.
it's slow and steady, but
Slow and steady, But if you do win the lotto, let us know.
we
Forge
won't
will
say
share in
anything,
it.
but there will be signs, and it's just like a massive horse sculpture just in the parking lot.
Just a golden horse sculpture.
You're like, "What
you know.
about the artist?" And you're like, "But my golden horse."
What's coming up next in the Mad Horse season? At the date of this episode that's releasing, you've got May ahead of you, and so the last show is Empty Plate. Is that correct?
Yes, An Empty Plate in the Café de Grande Boeuf by Michael Hollinger is our season closer. It's gonna close May 17th, so, there'll still be some time to come see it. This, it's another kind of memory play. It takes place within a cafe in Paris in the 1960s,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it is described as a feast of adjectives.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
one of our protagonists is in his own existential spiral, and his solution is to go to this restaurant that he's like an owner of, but he's like, I will not eat while I'm here. And that is my suffering, is to starve myself. And the staff is like, please don't do that. But while they tried to entertain him through the description of the dishes and the meals and feed his mind and soul that way, there's a lot of drawing out the memories and the whys and like, what are we doing and what is our purpose? And it's which can sound kind of dense, but it's very funny. It's very farcical. We have a really awesome cast. It's 6 actors. We have company members, Jake Cody, Marie Stewart Harmon, and Joe Bearer as our core wait staff of the restaurant.
Mhm.
And they're joined by guest artists, Tom Haushalter, Gusta Johnson, and Daniel Carambalis as the rest. And it's so funny and goofy, but so heartfelt. And I think it'll give people a lot to think about, but you're gonna also walk away feeling a little bit dreamy.
Oh, well, I'm excited to see it. Um, Everyone, we've been talking to Allison McCall from Mad Horse Theater Company. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Josh. Can I say there's one more thing I should probably plug?
Sure, go for it.
Is June 3rd at Oxbow in Portland will be our season 41 reveal and fundraiser. So we have 4 titles in store for our next season that we're really, really excited about. And that will be the first place that we will share it. And this fundraiser will also include some raffle items, some silent auction, a live auction, in a true Mad Horse fashion, also some really silly surprises. But it's a really fun community event at Oxbow from 6 to 8. Information will be on our website, but we would really love folks to come and find out what we have in store. We're really, really excited for what we have lined up for season 41.
You can count me in. I'll be there.
Yay!
For the auctions and for everything else.
You're like, I need a vintage basketball.
I need a vintage basketball. I was just about to say that. For those of you who don't know, you just have to show up for the inside joke. Thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you, Josh. This was really fun.
This episode was hosted by Joshua N Hsu with post-production by Sam Rapaport.